A dash of mystery, a sparkle of magic, and all things cozy. Join your host, Elle Hartford, for Cozy Alchemy, a proud member of the Authors on the Air network. Hello and welcome to Cozy Alchemy, the podcast all about cozy fairy tale books. I'm Elle, and my guest today is R. Lee Fryar, author of Wickedly Ever After, which we will get to in just a minute. But first, R. Lee is going to start us off with a game of two truths and a lie.
Okay, so this is probably not one of the things I do really well, but we'll try and see if I can pull the wool over anyone's eyes. Number one.
No worries.
Wickedly Ever After started out as an exchange I had in my Slack group involving a funny typo. Number two. The large number of pets in Wickedly Ever After stems from what I do for my day job. 3. I drew the dragon illustration at the front of the book.
Oh, fun. Oh, I love these. These are really on point with your book, too. Okay. The day job. We'll definitely have to get into that as a follow-up question. I like the typo story. I'm going to guess that number 3 is the lie.
Number 3 is the lie. I did not draw the dragon illustration. I did draw and paint the epilogue. This is okay. That one, fully painted.
Nice.
But no, I didn't do the dragon illustrations.
I thought that seemed maybe a little bit complicated.
Sort of a half-truth and a lie.
Yeah, well, those are the best ones. Those are. Okay, but that means that our follow-up question is, what do you do for your day job?
Okay, for my day job, I'm a veterinarian. So I see pets day in, day out, so we're going to have pets in pretty much everything I write.
That's perfect. We're a huge fan of animal companions here.
Well, we may see one pop up here in a minute. There's one on my bed back there sleeping, so she may turn up here or not. I don't know. We'll see if she makes an appearance later.
All right. Very cool. Okay, so your book, Wickedly Ever After, just came out this fall. Would you tell us a bit about it just to get us started?
Okay, Wickedly Ever After is about 2 grumpy old witches, and they have spent their entire lives propping up a magic system that was supposed to make the world a perfect place. And they've done this for almost 1,000 years. And this is the story of how they realized that what they thought was the right thing to do was actually the wrong thing to do. But they've spent nearly 1,000 years upholding this particular tradition, and it's really hard for them to change, particularly when the person that they have to convince to make this change is their worst frenemy, basically. So it's frenemies to lovers, a comedy of compounding errors and sorting out everything from feelings to who she gets to fall in love with who. That's basically what it's about.
It's a very adept summary. And it's right on the front of the book, I believe it says, this is a fairy tale romp, which I think comes through like right from the beginning, right? With like even in the prologue, we have a lot of magic and like fairy tale wickedness and humor coming around, which had me thinking right from the get-go, like, were there particular fairy tales that inspired you?
One particular fairy tale in any real way. I'd say if I had to blame something in my background for Wickedly Ever After, it might be a steady diet of Rocky and Bullwinkle as a child and fractured fairy tales. So I grew up kind of liking to see twists on standard fairy tales. Of course, that show had some political leanings and things like that too that were always a little interesting given the time. But combine that with the fact that I did enjoy reading a lot of fairy tales as a child. And then as a grown-up, I watched Shrek for the first time and really enjoyed that twisting and the playing with different fairy tales. Yeah, I think some story like this
Right.
was going to be inevitable for me to write. It was just going to end up this way.
It's been brewing for a while.
It must have. It must have. Like that potion in the pot.
I like that.
So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the correlation with Shrek too feels very adept, right? Like the world with all of the fairy tale creatures and things running around in it. Yeah,
yeah.
that's very cool. Now, as we go through the book, you start off each chapter with like it could be a passage from a letter or a memoir, or like a little written quote or excerpt, which is such a fun way of engaging with the story and like getting to see a little bit of background or context. So I really wanted to dig into like it's very very cool. So this isn't like a why would you do that? But it's like why, like what was your reasoning and how did you choose what to include?
Well, I don't know that there was any definitive thing that just said that this is the way to do it. It might have been that the very first chapter I wrote, which was not the prologue was actually added in revisions. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the very first sentence I wrote was that was Hector's letter to Ida, asking that if she was feverish and poxed. Um, and I got the idea that these two witches had been writing each other back and forth, kind of a you've got mail sort of exchange going on for years and years and
Gotcha.
years, that had sort of turned into this playing pranks on each other and annoying each other. And so the letters were probably the first thing that I knew was going to go at the tops of each chapter. It turned out, of course, that there wasn't a letter for every chapter, but I did get the idea that there must be some sort of form of journalism in this world. And thus we had the Sorcerer's Star was born, which is probably based on every minute of my young life that I spent standing in grocery lines behind my mother, reading the headlines of the National Enquirer. So I'd say that's probably where I just started realizing that I was going to have something for every chapter the same way. So I ended up including some excerpts from the magical law. And then there are later two letters, I think, between the other two cardinal witches arguing over who they're going to fire. So I'd say that the reason I did it started out with Hector and Ida's letters, and then it just sort of snowballed from there.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, and I love that because what I'm hearing from that is that the characters came first, or at least the interaction between the characters came first
Yes,
as
they
you were
always come
thinking of the
first.
story. Is that right? Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. No.
In my truth that I had that it was built on a exchange in a Slack group involving a typo. That is true, and the typo had to do with a person who had written that they had updated their bog, and I said, well, I put Meyer imps in mine. And we just kept going at it. And I had the idea that this could be a fun thing to write about two very grumpy old people who pretty much live just to one up each other in their gardens and in their whole lives. And from that point on, I got a clear image of Hector West and then Ida North.
I love that. And I'm glad that you brought the story of the typo back around too. I should have asked about that. It's lovely the way ideas just come out of nowhere or, out of thin air, it seems sometimes.
Yeah.
That's really fun. Okay. Shifting just slightly, we talk a lot on the podcast about dealing with deep matters in sort of a cozy fashion. And I feel like with Wickedly Ever After, it's a really good example of this, especially with the idea of love, right? Like we have the romance going on, but we also have like love magic that's gone haywire. And so while there's sweet things and nice things happening and developing, we also have like kind of doomed loves and a darker side to it too. That I really appreciated that about this book. Was it something that you knew like right from the start that you were going to do?
Kind of. I knew that Hector and Ida had known each other for a long time. And I knew that when it came down to the happily ever after magic, anything that lasts as long as it did had to involve some forms of sacrifice. And in their case, it was basically giving up their chance at their life for everybody else in the world. And I think that's what it made it so hard, particularly for Hector, who grew up in the middle of the famine and the war and the post-war aftermath, and watching his own family have people who died, versus Ida, who also went through the same process but was not as steeped in that trauma as he was. To have to realize that they're giving up their lives to take care of this particular problem, and then coming to the end of their long life and wondering, was that all really worth it? And I think that kind of speaks to a truth I kind of wanted to get out in the novelist, that what they had intended to do, they had the best of intentions. They wanted to basically take the worst person in the world, which would have been the royalty, marry them to one of the best people in the world, a common person, and have two people give up their choice so that everybody else could have one and could have a choice that would work out in their life and be wonderful. So they had really good intentions, but the best of intentions are sometimes just, end up falling flat at the end, and they can always go wrong. And that's what happens in this book. And it makes them question whether they did the right thing too for themselves.
Absolutely. I love that. That's so poignant. It's very lovely. And I think in your answer you kind of also get to the fact that like there's a ton of world building going on. And not least because they are so long lived, right? So there's so much history, in as part of your story. Was that something, it seems like something that you really embraced? Like, is that true? Like, do you really enjoy the world building part of things?
I'm a little bit more maybe organic about it, and that it builds as I write the book. I don't sit down and come up with the magic system. It just sort of unfolds for me, and then I refine that in revision so that it makes sense, or at least sort of. So yeah, like I said, the prologue was actually added in revisions. So I actually had to think back to how that might have gone down, and having Hector be the one present at the very initial beginning. There was one fairy tale in particular I did reference for that one, and it's a very old Welsh fairy tale about a child who's with a witch, and he ends up touching a pot of soup, and he sticks his finger in his mouth, and that's how he becomes a very wise person. And so Hector talking about don't ever lick your finger, don't do that, and that most magical potions sometimes have a second stage if they explode. That all kind of comes from that. So I kind of went really far back in my fairy tale background to bring that one as the initial one that I built in. Not particularly well known one, but a fun one.
No, and my books on my end, I also write retold fairy tales, at least for one series. So I am also like very steeped into this world of research into fairy tales, and so I think that's what I saw that reference and was like, oh, okay, I know what we're doing here.
I'm certainly no expert on it, but I do enjoy reading them, and kind of grew up reading them and been collecting them as an adult too. So hopefully I'll keep playing with that.
Yeah, no. That's immediately what I had to ask you was, okay, so do you have a bookshelf somewhere that is like full of all of these different fairy tales?
Not as full as it used to be.
Collections.
Yeah, I have a few. I have a few still around. I was lucky enough to have a really good used bookstore in my college days, and I collected basically anything I could find at that point. Many of them have kind of fallen apart now. I sort of need to replace them, but that was from frequent reading. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I
Well,
still have
that's good. They're
some, and
well
I hope
loved.
to get more. So
Nice. Yeah, I had to. I just yesterday, I'm looking off to the side because that's where my research bookshelf is. Research, it's a good excuse for
right,
collecting books. Uh, but just yesterday I had to pack them up because we're moving, so I is on the top of my mind.
yeah,
So yeah, I apologize for
yeah. Some of
the
mine got
slight
cold in
digression.
moving too. So yes, books are heavy when you move them.
Yeah, I know, I know. Yeah, I mean they stack nicely in boxes, but they get heavy
And then you don't want to
fast
pick it
too.
up.
So
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Okay. Like I said, I just really appreciate um that we're seeing both sides of love and choice too, right? Your answer talked a lot about choice there, um, and making the right choices. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I have to ask, I was looking back at my notes and I don't remember what so how many other books have you written?
Well, let's see. The many that I have written. Not everything has been published. Um, I
Fair,
have.
fair.
I have. I'm probably not going to recommend any of mine right now because I'm actually in the process of taking back rights on two, and eventually probably
Mm,
either republish them. And then there's one that I'm sort of still on the fence about. So I'm pretty much just going to plug this one today. Okay.
got
But
it.
yeah, uh,
That's totally fair.
there are a lot more
That's
coming
it's
down the
fair. I
pipeline. So
Well, and that makes sense, yeah, because your answers with the very grounded world building and thinking about like the characters and the choices that they make, it to me when I hear those answers, it sounds like, oh, okay, so like you think a lot about stories, perhaps have been telling stories for a long time, which is what made me think of how many other books have you got?
I have a whole lot on this laptop,
Um,
let me tell you. A whole lot. More than I can deal with
fair
sometimes.
enough. I think we've been about 50-50 on the podcast so far, where between authors who say, this is my first book and I queried it and I got it published, and authors who say, yeah, I've got stacks and I have a whole library under my bed, like hooked away. So we each have our own path, that's for sure.
That's very true.
Now, yeah, um, on kind of a more behind the scenes note, getting then back to the end of your book and your acknowledgments, you talk about your local writers group and library. Can you talk a bit about, your experience of finding community in those places?
It's not easy when you're from a reasonably small town. Our
Mm.
actual
Mm-hmm.
writers group that I talk about, we actually no longer meet because we're down to like two people
Uh,
and a
mm.
third, but because of schedules, we've not been able to make it work out. So we basically just talk to each other when we can on Instagram. But when I started out, I basically had a novel that I had basically printed out and written, and I brought it in a binder. And at that time, we had maybe six people in the group, and they said, "Do you want to read?" And I said, "Yes," and opened it up and got started. And I ended up taking over that writing group toward the end of it because the initial person could not meet anymore. So I'd say that's the best way to do it is, go to your local library, see if they have anybody getting together to read or to work on things, and then just, show up and bring your gear and just sit down and get started. It did work out rather nicely because we ended up moving from one building, which was the old library right next door to the new library, which is not a new library, and in fact, leaks and needs a roof. But because we were meeting in the actual library, we had librarians who would sit there and work on their materials while they listened to us read. So I ended up forming a fairly good relationship with those librarians, which means that, I can take in a book now and they put it on the shelf. So that was quite nice.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, there's a couple things in there that I want to explore further, but first of all, just to clarify, you're going into this writing group and you were reading your selection or your chapter or your scene out loud to everybody?
You bet. Yep.
Nice.
1,000 words or a couple minutes, whatever's shorter. But yeah.
Gotcha. That seems a little intense. Like I'm also part of a writing group, but we usually would exchange our papers there or, email them ahead of time and read them silently. But I can see how reading it out loud for people would absolutely draw in, the librarian who's working on the side, or it also is probably especially helpful, right? That's one of the revising tips that you hear is to read your work aloud.
It actually is. It is very useful for finding out if, it's not just for missed word here or there, because that happens to everybody. But
right.
I can sort of gauge a reaction if I have too many people who are confused with something. You can go back and clarify and work on this. So I still often read aloud to myself if I'm working on revisions. My last pass on anything I send to my agent or send back to the publisher always has a reading pass where I actually sit and listen to the book being read aloud and then work at the same time. So yeah, very helpful to listen to it. Ideally in the most bland voice you can, because then you really notice all your word choices. But yeah.
I can see that. Absolutely. And now, okay. On the library end of things, I really like your story in that it highlights the importance of the personal connections, right? Like if you know the folks personally, then it's, you go to them and you're like, oh, I have a book, and people are excited to support that and add it to the shelf, right?
Yes, and it was probably my number one thing that I eventually wanted to see was my book on a library shelf. Forget stores, that's fun, but I don't even have, we have one tiny little indie bookstore in the entire city where I live. And before that, we didn't have anything but a used bookstore. So me actually getting to see one of my books in a store was probably not going to be something that would happen for me, but being able to see it on my local library shelf, that was a big deal.
Absolutely. That's so cool. It's really cool. I feel like we talk, in the like cozy genres, and on the podcast we talk about finding community in the books, like our characters find community or find their family or find their, their love. But we forget about doing that as an author too, right? It can be tough.
The thing is, we now have a lot of good online communities, so that's very helpful. That was not a case when I was starting out. So
fair, yeah, that's true. Absolutely. my pause is me stopping my own self from going on a rant, because this is something I feel strongly about, is connecting with others. So it was really neat to see that directly acknowledged in your book. Now, I always ask folks if there's any of their other works that they want to highlight, but of course, as you said, you kind of a little bit in flux with that one. So in place of that, I will ask, are you planning to write more books in this world in particular?
Yeah, the sequel is set in this. Yeah, the sequel is set in this particular world, so I get to play with some more fairy tales, hopefully. I get to dig into a little bit of lore that does come from Wickedly Ever After, when Ida is talking about the
Okay.
destruction of dragons in her mountains. So we will get to meet some more dragons. Um, and on Hector's end of things, there is a group of people he never figured out what to do with. Um, and they're going to show up in this one as well. So yes, I've set some more in this particular world.
That's good. I'm glad that there's a sequel. Yeah, I'm glad that that's very cool. Is it gonna be a duology, do you think? Like, is that it? Or are you gonna keep going even past that?
I don't know. We'll see what the cards hold. Right now, I'm not looking
Mm-hmm.
forward any further than the sequel. I have some other books that I've written that kind of have a similar feel to them. Well, one of them does. One of them is completely different, very different feel from a completely different
Mm.
world. So we'll just see what happens. All we
Fair
can
enough.
do.
Yeah, there's only so far you can plan, right?
That's right.
Absolutely. Is that what you're working on right in this moment?
Um, I have on my stack, my enormous stack on my desk. I have the sequel to
Mhm.
finish getting together, and then it's going to go off to my agent to hopefully tell me it's not completely steaming garbage. Maybe at least lukewarm.
Aw.
Um,
Yeah.
and after that, I have three more books that I need to get revisions done on. Um, One of them might be an option for this book with the publisher. The other one, I don't know. My agent hasn't told me, other than she said, I have someone in mind. Please revise this quickly. So I'm trying to do all of this quickly on very low energy, but hopefully we will get through it by the end of the winter.
I
So yes, I've got a
was
lot
gonna
to
say,
do.
yeah. Yeah, it sounds like you're quite busy on top of having a day job too. That
Busy.
is a
And the
lot.
day job has been a little intense lately. Yes.
Oh, yeah. I imagine it could be. Well, uh, maybe perhaps on a lighter note, what advice would you give to yourself if you could go back and talk to yourself when you were just starting out? What would you say?
Oh, well, I started out probably when I was a kid just telling stories to myself. So, but if I could go
Mm,
back to when I started writing for publishing, because I didn't
mm-hmm.
start doing that until I was in my 40s. I've been writing since I was in my teens, but I didn't write with any idea of being published until I was well into my 40s. Um, I would probably say to just trust the process a little bit more than I did. At the time, I was very sure that sitting down, just opening a blank document and typing was probably not the way people should write books. There were things called
Uh,
outlines and stuff called plotting, and apparently you needed to have all of these things in a row. And there was this book called Save the Cat, and at some point you had to save the cat. Um, and I went down a rabbit hole for about 6 months of trying to turn myself into one of those plotting writers, with limited success and a lot of angst. And eventually threw up my
mm,
hands in despair and said, "Well, the way it is the way it is. If I have to write the whole story to write an outline, then that is the way it's going to be. And if I have to do that, then I don't need to write the outline." But it did take me longer than I would have liked to get to that point. At the time, I didn't
mm.
know that there were pantsers and plotters. I just knew that every craft book said you needed to do it this way. And it took me a while to find books written by people who wrote like I did. Um, and most of them
Yeah.
are very much do it your own way, and don't care what anybody else says. And that probably would have been something that I could have heard at that time that would have helped me out a little bit. So yeah, basically
Right.
trust your
Yeah,
process. If
yeah.
you're a plotter, stay with plotting. If you're a pantser, stay with pantsing. Play around with the opposite side of things occasionally, but don't ever take it to heart. Only use what works
Mm.
for you.
Yeah, right. If it works for you, then it's valid, right?
Right.
Writing. I I'd love to ask a follow-up question. Um, just because and I'm sure many other authors, many folks listening to this podcast have a similar story, right? Of having been writing forever, but then at some point pivoting to be like, okay, now I'll try publishing this, I'll try writing this and then sharing it. What made you make that switch?
It actually might have been getting on Twitter and seeing pitch wars. It was back in the day when we had a valid valid social networking system that was words and not pictures. Um, but so that might have got me interested in it. Of course, I didn't end up getting into pitch wars, never did. Did get into some other writing mentorship contests in later years, but never with a whole lot of success. Um, So that might have been what kind of got me thinking about it. That and you meeting other authors who were all pursuing traditional publishing, and I'm like, oh, I guess I could do that too. Might as well try, and then just kind of went from there. So yeah, never underestimate the power of your peers, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. Community again, right? And just
And it
exposure to
definitely helps because
ideas.
publishing can be a rough go of it, no matter what you do. Indies have it rough. Traditional
Yeah.
publishing, they have it rough too. So it does help to have other people who are going through it with you, and also those who are going down different roads. I still remember vividly when it's like, well, if you're going to self-publish, don't even bother traditionally publishing. They will never pick up self-published books. But wake up. When Romantasy came about, a lot of self-published ones found themselves courted by traditional pub. So rules change, and having a group or a group of like-minded writers some of them who are above you, some of whom are below you, and at different stages in their journey, kind of helps keep everybody grounded.
Mm, definitely. That's a great way to put that. I love that. Okay. Final question. What is one win that you've had in the past week? Anything, big or small?
Oh, let's do an animal win. Can we do an animal win?
Ooh,
I had a
please. Yeah,
patient. I had a
absolutely.
patient who I guess I saw him first part of last week. Uh, had not really been eating for almost 2 months, at least not eating normal food. I
Oh,
was very worried about this little cat because he should have weighed 10 pounds, and he's about 5.5 pounds. Just a little bone, sweetest
wow.
cat. Ended up sending him to a specialist who did an ultrasound on him, and we didn't find bad disease, which was really nice because I was very worried. He was a 10-year-old
Good.
cat. Bad disease happens. It turned out that he has a disease that's readily fixable as long as we feed him. So we ended up putting a feeding tube in, and I got to send him home yesterday, and he had already gained another little quarter of a pound with his food. And I think he's going to do well. So I'm very pleased with how he's turned out. So that was my win for the week, is getting a good diagnosis on this cat, and actually getting some helpful things his owner can do to hopefully turn this cat around. So that was one of my big wins this week. So that was
That's
that was my big
wonderful.
win.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that might be, well, all wins are wins, but that might be one of the most sweet wins
I'm
that we've
always I'm
had.
always pleased when you get a good win on a little patient. But that you'll see the pets
Right?
in my
Yeah.
book. Pretty much
Yeah.
all of my mind tends to go to some of these cases that I've had or have worked on when I'm adding pets. So,
Mm. Aw, that's so lovely. Okay, that's a very nice note to end on. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
And yeah, and I will have all of your your links, your book, everything in the show notes so that people can find you. So once again, it was such a very nice win. I'm so glad. One more, thank you. And all you listeners, I will talk to you next time. Cozy Alchemy is brought to you by Authors on the Air, and our theme music is by Cyberwave Orchestra. For everything else, blame Elle. You can find her online at ellehartford.com.